If it's not a fire, can they put out smoke? Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. My name is Janae, if you didn't know, and today's video is another true crime episode. So if you're ready, let's go. Alright y'all, so today we're just jumping right into the case, and today we are going to be talking about Tynesha Stewart. And Tynesha was born on July 10th, 1987, and she was described as being small in stature with a huge personality, but an even bigger singing voice. But as much as Tynesha loved to sing and have a good time with her friends, she was just as focused and goal driven, and academics was her thing. Y'all know how most people only go to school because they have to and their parents make them, but they really don't like school at all. Tynesha was the exact opposite. She absolutely loved going to school. She loved to learn, and because of this love and thirst for knowledge and just her pure love and dedication to her schoolwork, when Tynesha was a junior in high school, she received a $40,000 scholarship to attend Texas A&M University. But before she graduated and left for college, Tynesha would get a job, and she would get this job at a local Pizza Hut because she was very independent and she wanted her own money. And it's while she was working at this Pizza Hut that she met a man named Timothy Shepard. Now, Timothy was quite a bit older than her. He was 8 years older than her. And Tynesha was only like 16 or 17 years old at this point. But the two of them were very drawn to each other. And in the beginning, when her family was just finding out about the relationship between her and Timothy, Tynesha actually lied to her family about their age difference because she knew that her family wouldn't like it. But Timothy ended up winning her family over, and when they found out about his real age, they kind of was just like, okay, well, at this point, what can we do? Her mama loved him, her siblings loved him. His age didn't even matter at this point. And over the next year and a half, Tynesha and Tim was rocking hard. They was like thick as thieves, okay? But eventually it was time for Tynesha to graduate high school and go off to college. And it's no surprise that she graduated from her high school in the top 3% of her class with honors. And now it was time for her to head off to Texas A&M. Now, Texas A&M was about a 2.5 hour drive away from her home in Houston. And her and Tim knew that it was kind of going to be hard for them to maintain a long distance relationship, but they decided that they wanted to make it work. And they decided that they was going to give this long distance thing a try. However, 3 months after Tynesha left, Tim decided that he couldn't do the long distance thing, and he broke up with Tynesha. But it wasn't long after that he actually ended up popping up at Texas A&M to surprise Tynesha, and the two of them would end up rekindling their relationship. But this go round, everything wasn't all good though, because Tynesha was living her life, starting to branch out, making new friends, and Tim was back in Houston doing the same thing that he been doing. So on occasion, Tim would go to Texas A&M and pretty much cause a little bit of a scene if he couldn't find Tynesha. He would call her constantly. Like, he did not like the fact that she was out there living her life. And this constant calling and going up there would continue up until about spring of 2007. But just about a month before spring break was to happen, Tynesha had started talking to a new guy, somebody who went to school with her, and she really started to like him. However, her and Tim was still together, but she decided that when she went home for spring break, she was going to spend time with her friends, but she was also going to meet up with Tim, and this would be when she would break it off for good because she started to realize that Tim wasn't what she wanted. So she was going to go home, she was going to spend time with her friends, she was going to go to the Beyonce concert, and she was going to break up with Tim. That was the plan for spring break 2007. So spring break rolls around and Tynesha goes back home to Houston. Now, I don't know what she was doing for the first couple of days of spring break. I don't know if she had met up with her friends or not, but I do know that her and her friends were supposed to go to the Beyonce concert on the 18th. That was a Sunday. And Tynesha didn't go to the concert. So on the 19th, people in her circle and her mama started realizing, like, ain't nobody heard from Tynesha, and she missed that Beyonce concert, and she was not about to miss that concert for nobody, okay? So they started talking, and they like, okay, so nobody's heard from her, nobody's talked to her, let's call the police. And when they called the police to report Tynesha as a missing person, the police pretty much tell her mom, Gail, like, listen, your daughter is grown, and it's spring break. She's probably out there enjoying her life, having fun. Call us back if she don't come back in a couple of days, okay? And so that was pretty much Gail's first encounter with the police to report her daughter as missing. But Gail and Tynesha's siblings, they wasn't about to sit around and wait for the police to call them back or wait to call the police. They decided that they was going to do a little bit of investigating of their own. So they called the hospitals to see if maybe Tynesha had gotten into an accident, maybe something happened to her, maybe she was sick, got hurt. They didn't know. So they called all the hospitals. She wasn't there. They called the jails. Maybe she got into a fight. Maybe she got arrested. Maybe she got a DUI. They didn't know. So they called all the jails. She wasn't there. And so then they started calling around to all the people that Tynesha knew. And pretty much nobody had heard from her. But then when they called Tim said that he had actually last seen her on the 15th. But he hadn't heard or spoken to her since. Now, everybody else had last heard from her on the 14th that evening. So at this point, Tim is the last person to have seen or talked to her. But they decided to wait till Monday to call some of her college friends to see if she went to class on that Monday. And she hadn't. And so they called the police back and was like, listen, she off of spring break now. And ain't no way that Tynesha was about to miss class. Because remember I told y'all, Tynesha was all about her academics. She was not about to miss class for nobody. So in an effort to bring awareness to the fact that Tynesha had gone missing, her family and friends had set up a vigil at a community church to hand out flyers, to ask questions, to see if anybody knew anything. Just like I said, to bring awareness to the fact that Tynesha had gone missing. And while they're having this vigil at the church, the police show up to pretty much gather information about Tynesha. And this is when they find out that according to her family's investigation, that Tim was the last person to have seen or heard from Tynesha. And like I said, that was on the 15th of March. So they ended up going to Tim's apartment, which wasn't too far away from the church, just to see if they could talk to him, but he wasn't at home. And so they ended up talking to the property manager and a couple of Tim neighbors. And when they talked to the property manager said that there had actually been a fire at Tim's apartment a couple of days ago, like 2 days ago. And then when they talked to one of the neighbors said that they had heard some gunshots in the woods, like across the road from the apartment complex on the night that Tynesha had gone missing. And so the police officer decided to prioritize the gunshots versus the fire. Because it's like, okay, well, we'll talk about the fire later. Let's figure out what was going on with these gunshots. And so he calls in a K9 unit to see if they can, find anything in the woods, see if maybe Tynesha, unfortunately, is in there. And so they get this K9 unit out. They go a little bit into the woods and they do, in fact, get a hit. So they're walking, they're following the dog, and the dog leads them to some decaying remains. However, these are the remains of a dead animal. So thankfully, it's not Tynesha. But at the same time, it's like, okay, so where is she then? So now that they got the tip about the shots fired out of the way and they know that that was the remains of a dead animal, now it's time to talk about the fire. So this police officer calls the fire department and they get in contact with the responding firefighters. And they said that when they got to the apartment, it was smoky as hell, like smoke was all over the place. But it took Tim a little while to open the door. And they actually had to get a sheriff to come knock on the door so that Tim would actually open the door and let them in. And once they got inside, they went to the balcony where he was barbecuing, where it was all smoky and stuff. They put out the fire or decrease the smoke. I don't really know. If it's not a fire, can they put out smoke? I don't know. But they did what they had to do, and then they went back into the apartment. And when they looked around the apartment, just to see, I don't know why they looked around the apartment, but they did. And they noticed that in the bathtub, there was a bunch of meat. And this meat was described as looking like ribs that was covered in ice and water. And when they asked Tim what he was doing, he said that he was thawing out meat to barbecue because he had been asked to barbecue for a large event of like 100+ people. And so he used his bathtub to thaw out the meat, and then that's what he was grilling when they got there. And with that being said, the firefighters just left. Now, as this officer is getting off the phone with the firefighters, Tynesha's cousin is handing him a phone saying that Tim is on the other line. So this officer talks to Tim, and Tim tells the officer that he'll meet him down at the church to talk. So Tim pulls up to the church, and the officer starts talking to him. And shortly afterwards, detectives come to the church and then take Tim down to the station for questioning in regards to Tynesha's disappearance. And Tim is very receptive at this point. He gives no issues, and he tells detectives that in the early morning hours of March 15th, he had picked Tynesha up. And it was between like 3 and 5 o'clock in the morning. And as they riding back to Tim's apartment, Tynesha gets a phone call. And this phone call is from the new guy that I told y'all about earlier, who she was talking to from college. And naturally, Tim was like, who is this? And why is dude calling you this early in the morning? And Tynesha just brushed him off. And that kind of pissed him off. That made him mad. But he kind of let it go. But once they got back to Tim's apartment, he really couldn't let it die down. And he brought it back up like, hey, yo, who is old boy and why the hell was he calling you this early in the morning? And Tynesha ended up getting mad. And she was like, listen, I'm not talking about this. We're not talking about this. That is none of your concern. And mind your business. And then she just left the apartment. And that was the last time that Tim said that he seen Tynesha. And so with all of this information, the detectives ask if they can perform a search on Tim's apartment. And he gives consent. He says it's not a problem. And so the detectives go over to Tim's apartment. And when they get to Tim's apartment, it was a couple of things in there that seemed a little bit suspicious to them. So as soon as they walked in, they noticed the smell of fresh paint, which was a little bit weird, but okay. But then they noticed that the carpet appeared to have some bleach stains on it. And then when they went into the bathroom, it appeared as though the floor had just been mopped. However, it wasn't the whole floor though. It was literally just by the tub, which...
that's suspicious.
So they ended up dusting for fingerprints and swabbing for DNA and doing all of that. And then they left because although those things were suspicious to them, they really didn't have nothing to say that, okay, a crime was committed here. So they collected what they needed to collect and they left. Well, they left Tim's apartment. They didn't leave the entire complex just yet because the detective wanted to talk to some of the neighbors just in case maybe they seen something, maybe they heard something. He just didn't want to leave no stone unturned. And so he goes around and he starts talking to some of Timothy's neighbors. And one of the neighbors that he talked to said that they heard water running consistently. And it wasn't like somebody was taking a bath. It wasn't like somebody was taking a shower. It wasn't the sink. He specifically heard bath water running for a considerable amount of time. Then he said that he heard some pounding, but he couldn't put his finger on where the pounding noise was coming from. He just know he heard pounding. But then there was one other thing that he said he heard that was really kind of weird, and that was the fact that he heard the garbage disposal running continuously back to back to back. And while none of these noises are out of the ordinary to hear on a daily basis, he said that the thing that made it weird was that they were all constant. And another neighbor said that while Tim barbecuing wasn't weird, the fact that Tim's barbecue this particular time smelled like possum, that was weird. So the detective collects all of this evidence and he just stores it away. He stores it in his mental, in his files, and he keeps on investigating. However, while he's doing his investigating, he's not too much telling the family or the public too much about what's going on. He kind of want to keep it under wraps. But this led the family to feel like the detectives and the police weren't taking Tynesha's disappearance as seriously as they felt like it needed to be taken. So what Tynesha's family did was they got in contact with a man named Quanell X. And he's pretty much a black community activist who fights against injustices against the black community. And he's a very well-known and trusted man within the black community. And this is who Tynesha's sister Gayla got in contact with. And now generally this wouldn't be a problem for Quanell X. And it kind of wasn't. However, Tim's cousin had also contacted Quanell X because of the interrogation that Tim had gone through with the police. They felt like the police were trying to get him to confess to something that he didn't do, and they wanted Quanell X's backing to make sure that Tim wasn't taken advantage of by the police in any way, shape, or form. So what ended up happening was that 7 days after Tynesha went missing, Quanell X met up with her sister Gayla, and the two of them go over to Timothy's apartment. And initially, Gayla wanted to go into Timothy's apartment with Quanell. However, Quanell decided that it would be best for Gayla to wait for him outside. So he goes into Timothy's apartment, and when he walks in, he can see the remnants of the police investigation. He can see the fingerprint dust, and he can see the luminol stains all over the bathroom. Now, I never really thought about the cleanup process after a detective goes into detective. I never thought about the cleanup process, like cleaning up the fingerprint dust, cleaning up the luminol. Like, I never thought about that. But nonetheless, Quanell X sees all of this and he starts talking to Timothy. And he pretty much just tells Timothy, listen, if I'm going to help you, I need you to tell me the truth. I need to know for real what happened. And this is when Tim tells Quanell that he indeed did kill Tynesha. And Quanell X immediately gets in contact with a news reporter. Now, you would think I would have said law enforcement, but he didn't do that because he didn't trust law enforcement. But when he got in contact with the news reporter got in contact with the law enforcement saying that Quanell X got Timothy to confess. And so they all ended up meeting at Timothy's apartment, and Tim takes Quanell with the police and the reporter following them to this dumpster. And he said that he dumped Tynesha's body inside of said dumpster. However, when the detectives and everybody get out to look inside the dumpster, it is now empty. But based off of Tim's confession, he ends up being arrested. And while Tim is in the interrogation room, he ends up confessing to the police as well. And he tells them that him and Tynesha had gotten into an argument over that phone call. And while they was arguing, Tynesha grabbed the knife and kind of swung it at him, and she missed. And after she did this, he said that he snapped and he just grabbed her by the neck and started choking her. And he said he didn't mean to, but it was in self-defense. And after she died, he took her body to the dumpster that he took them to earlier, and then he just went home. And so now the detective's main priority is finding Tynesha. However, they find out that this particular dumpster was dumped in a landfill that was, I think it was like 500 acres maybe, and that finding her would be damn near impossible. And so they wouldn't be conducting a search of the landfill, but they would still be pursuing criminal charges against Tim based off of Tim's confession. And they also wanted to grab any pieces of evidence from his apartment that they could find that would help convict him. And so they ended up getting a search warrant for to go back into his apartment. And when they did, they found what appeared to be charred bone fragments on the balcony that was below Tim's. They also ended up finding burnt hair. And then when they went to look into the garbage disposal based off of what that neighbor said, they ended up finding teeth along with some other bone fragments. Now, while the charred bone fragments and some of the bone fragments that were found inside of the garbage disposal weren't able to be tested for DNA, the enamel that was found inside of the teeth or on the teeth, I don't know if enamel was in or on, I don't know. Anyway. But the enamel from the teeth was able to be tested for DNA, and it did come back as belonging to Tynesha. So now at this point, once those results come back, they know that they never needed to search that landfill in the first place because he never took her to the dumpster and she was never taken to the landfill. Based off of what they found and some of the neighbors' testimony, it is clear that he killed Tynesha, he dismembered her body inside of his home, and he tried to get rid of her remains by barbecuing her. Now, even though Tim gave a full confession, he decided to plead not guilty to the murder of Tynesha Stewart and went to trial. And his trial started in September of 2008. And during the trial, it had come out that Tim had been abusive to Tynesha. And this was based off of some of her friends' testimony and some of the people who she went to college with. They said that Tynesha had confided in them, but she didn't feel comfortable going to her family about it because she knew that her family was going to ride out for her. Not to say that her friends weren't supportive of her, but she knew that her family was going to ride out. You know what I mean? So she didn't tell them too much about what was going on between her and Tim. So based off of this, the prosecution said that Tim could not deal with Tynesha moving on with her life. He could not deal with the fact that she was talking to other men, that she was branching out, that she was moving on, and she was living her life. And when she got that call from that other man, he couldn't deal with it. He lost it, and that's why he murdered Tynesha. And the defense tried their best, but Tim was ultimately found guilty of the murder of Tynesha. But during the sentencing phase, it was almost like a mini trial. And so during the sentencing phase, Tim decided to take the stand. And he insisted that him killing Tynesha was in self-defense. And the prosecutor was brilliant. She got Tim to get down off of that stand and demonstrate. She said, "Show me. Show me what happened." And so Tim got off the stand and put his little scrawny, little raggedy ass hands around the prosecutor's neck. And when he got back on the stand, he said that he actually left his apartment to get some pliers and a saw to cut her up and to remove her teeth. And the prosecutor was like, "So you killed her, dismembered her, and then you put her on the barbecue pit." And Tim, he just couldn't resist. He said, "No, it was a smoker. You should have just shut up. Shut up." And if nothing else had sealed his fate before that, that had to have been the nail in his coffin. Because when it was all said and done, Tim was sentenced to 99 years in prison. And while that's justice for the family, nothing will ever bring Tynesha back. And unfortunately, 4 years after Tynesha was murdered, her mom, Gail, was unable to deal with the heartbreak from losing a child, and she ended up passing away due to a broken heart. And now her sister Gayla runs, I believe it's a nonprofit organization called the Tynesha Stewart Foundation, Keeping Secrets, and it is to advocate and help women who are in domestic violence situations who don't know how to get out. And she's doing amazing work in the name of her sister. But yeah, y'all, that is all I have for today's case. Thank you all so very much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one. Woo! Alright, y'all, so today we're just jumping right into today. He 28, or I don't know how old he was, never mind. And over the next year and a half, Tynesha and Timothy I'm gonna call him Tim because I'm tired of saying Timothy. Her family and friends has set up a vigil. And one of Tim's neighbors said that there was oh no. And so they ended up dusting for who fights against injustices for and so based off of this,